Hey everyone, welcome to the channel where a good boy reads you RPG horror stories. In today's episode, we have a tale of a creepy player that can't let go of a relationship, and takes it to creepy and cringy levels. But before we get into that, this graph shows that a lot of you watching aren't yet subscribed. So I'll make you a deal. For each new subscriber this video gets, will equal an extra head pat for Lucky. What do you think of that, Lucky? I thought so. So, subscribe. If not for me, then do it for Lucky. But with that out of the way, let's hop right into the story. DM literally keeps player in his basement. By Reddit user Throwaway 395-248. First up, content warning for some sexual situations and textbook emotional abuse, garnished with some good old-fashioned homophobia. And before you get discouraged by how damn long this thing is, there's a happy ending, and someone gets punched in the face. So, I first started playing D&D all the way back in 4th edition with some friends from high school. After we graduated, we all went to the same college together and kept playing, eventually switching from 4E to 5E. We saw each other every week, but we all had social lives outside of the game. It was pretty rare for us to hang out or talk outside our group text. After graduation, me and a couple of other players left the state for our jobs or higher degrees, but most of the group stayed in the area where we grew up. We thought us moving out would be the end of our game, but this was at the time where playing online and things like Roll20 or Fantasy Grounds started to take off. We took a couple months off, but we decided to continue our game on Fantasy Grounds, albeit with a new DM, who hadn't been with our group at all. We're usually pretty chill about newcomers joining our group, and we weren't going to complain if the forever DM could finally just play. I'll be calling the new DM Hal, after the character in the movie Megamind, because you'll see. The group met Hal in our hometown soon after I left some convention. He seemed like a pretty good guy and a great DM. I didn't know as much about his personal life for the first few months, mostly because I would only talk to him through Skype when we were playing, and on the group text when we weren't. All I knew was that he lived with his parents and that he had a graveyard shift at some hotel nearby. Things started to go wrong when he introduced a new player to the group. He told us that this friend of his was interested in our game, and that every time he told her about it, she would get really excited and ask lots of questions. Again, we're always happy to introduce a new player to the hobby, so we invited her into all of our stuff. I'd call her Roxanne, but that's way too long, so I'll call her Penny, to borrow from a similar, less self-aware story. Penny was brand new to D&D, so we had to help her out with the rules, character creation, etc. She would always be asking little questions during the game, which we were all happy to clear up for her. But Hal seemed really annoyed at her, and sometimes he would snap at her with some really inappropriate insults. Like, quote, "You dumb cunt," and stuff like that. We would always immediately call him out, say stuff like, "Whoa dude, you can't say stuff like that." And he would always walk it back and say he was kidding and chalk it up to his lack of a filter. A little off-putting, but it rarely happened, and he always stopped after being called out. Now, we're a group of millennials in our early adulthood and or college, so jokes about being depressed and overwhelmed were common. We all knew how tough life could get, so we have a little support system going, where if you can't make it to a session because of life stuff, or if you're just feeling too tired, it's not that big of a deal to sit one out. Sometimes we'd also take like 10 minutes before or after the game to just vent about work or school, or whatever. If anyone needed to get something off their chest, we thought this was a pretty neat system to make sure our friends could stay healthy and the game could keep being fun for everyone. Hal would come to abuse the crap out of it to emotionally manipulate every single one of us. About a year after she joined, Penny started to arrive late to a couple of sessions, and even miss one or two. Again, this is normally fine. Life happens and we're just playing D&D. For some reason, this made Hal really upset. He would mope for the whole session and say things like, "What's the point of doing all this prep if my players won't show up?" Even though it was literally just one player and we've had people miss before. And he would just generally say he was feeling really depressed. Penny got better at making it to the games on time, but Hal just seemed to get worse and worse. He would drag the entire group down and make self-deprecating jokes so often that I'm almost sure he was fishing for someone to say, "No, don't worry, I care about you." He even went as far as to joke about killing himself and putting things like, quote, "I'm seriously considering doing it tonight," or, quote, "You guys have been such great friends, goodbye," in our group text. We all assumed he was actually clinically depressed, which who knows, he might be. So we were understanding and tried to help him out and talk to him when we could. That's when I realized what was really going on. Here's what actually happened, gathered from my long conversations with both Hal and Penny. So, Hal and Penny met on a site called 4chan, first red flag, I know, as part of a thing called Adopt the Neat, where people who are considered neat, I'm pretty sure it's an acronym for something, but it basically means people who aren't employed and aren't going to school for anything, are paired up with providers who give them food, housing, and sometimes spending money, all out of the kindness of their hearts. Well, as you can probably guess, the providers often ask for something in return for all of that stuff. Anything from cleaning the house to, you guessed it, sex. So Hal agreed to let Penny stay in his basement and buy groceries for her, and Penny agreed to be friends with benefits with Hal. I threw up in my mouth a little when I heard it for the first time, but as far as I can tell, both of them knew what they were doing at the time, and it was all consensual. In the end, I thought it was weird, but hey, these are consenting adults, and they seem to be enjoying themselves. They had both been in our group for a couple of months when Penny apparently got into a serious relationship with another girl. As I understand it, they talked about it and Penny started paying rent, I assume at a heavy discount, and they became just friends and landlord/tenant. This is around the time that Hal became a little unstable in our game. Turns out, the reason she would arrive late or miss sessions was because she was spending time with her partner. Hal would always ask for specific details every time she went out, and if she wasn't back by the time she said, he would apparently send increasingly paranoid and sometimes suicidal texts to her. He told her that he was just protective about his friends, and that his anxiety makes him paranoid. This, friends, is classic grade A manipulation. According to Penny, he would also hug her at random times and ask to cuddle her because he's, quote, touch-starved, whatever that means. For those playing at home, that does get us to creep bingo. After I learned about this stuff, I got extremely worried about the whole situation. Was this legal? Did they both tell me everything, or is something worse actually happening? Would I be just as responsible if I stood by and let it happen? I convinced myself that if I replied every time he made some sad comment, or called him immediately after he threatened suicide again, he would be talking to me and he would not have a chance to emotionally manipulate Penny or any of my other friends. After all, they didn't know what he was doing, and I did. If I could somehow get to him, make him see that what he's doing is wrong, I could get him to leave everyone alone and go back to how things used to be. I told my therapist the whole story, because it was ruining D&D night, the one thing that let me relax and forget about work for 5 hours a week. She helped me realize two things. First, in trying to save everyone else, I had actually gotten myself stuck in his web, feeding him with attention and affirmation. Second, and this one was hard to admit to myself, the reason I was able to recognize his patterns before anyone else was because I was seeing myself in him. The same feeling of superiority that made him take advantage of everyone was making me think it was my responsibility to save them. So I let myself ignore him more and more, tried to think of more practical solutions, actually started hanging out with the rest of the group, Penny included. And for the first time in almost a year, I actually had fun with my childhood friends again. But Hal was still there, and the more fun we had, the harder he would try to bring us down. My friends and I knew what he was doing, but Penny refused to believe that he meant any harm. Anytime we suggested that he may just be trying to manipulate her, she said that she knew he wasn't because she knows him. It broke my heart a little, but I understand that breaking out of years of emotional abuse isn't something that's going to happen in 1 or 2 conversations while playing Quiplash with a bunch of nerds. So they both kept playing with us. Eventually, he stopped bringing his problems to the table after he realized we weren't really buying it. Alright, horror story's over. If all you want is to be creeped out by someone using the uncanny valley of emotional abuse, stop reading here. But we were lucky enough to have been given catharsis and a happy ending. So I'd be remiss if I didn't share it for those invested enough to have read this far. So, ever since we were in high school, we all had this dream of going on a big trip together and playing D&D somewhere exotic. Now that we were all adults, and most of us were gainfully employed, we could actually afford to do that. So, we planned a trip to Disney World with the whole gang. We pooled our resources and saved up for years, and the people that could afford it paid for the ones that couldn't. Although, Hal was very insistent on paying for Penny's share himself. I wonder why. I was in charge of the lodgings, so I made sure to separate the guys and the girls so there wouldn't be any trouble. Silly me to think that would be that simple. The trip was fun, but we had to spend most of our energy keeping him from actually harassing her. Every chance he got, he would try to touch her in some way, or buy her something inappropriately expensive, so she would either have to take it or look ungrateful, and just general whining when he didn't get his way. We asked him why he kept trying to touch her, and he said he was like that with all of his friends, and he's just a physical kind of guy. This all sounds very creepy, but I had a complete blast for the entire trip. It was like I was a little kid, and he was a cereal-starved anthropomorphic rabbit, chasing a bowl of cereal he could never actually get. First, of course, he didn't like the room assignments. He said dividing us by gender was sexist, so I asked if it would be okay if Penny switched with one of the guys, and of course, he said yes. We planned to share beds, so I let him choose which one to sleep in, and when he did, I put my stuff down on it. He tried to protest, but there wasn't a way to say it without making it obvious that he just wanted to sleep with Penny. So he settled for just making a slightly homophobic comment about how he had Penny sleep with the gay guy. Okay, very homophobic. He would try to sit next to her on rides, and I would plop myself right in between them. I tried putting my arm around him on the Jungle Cruise, and he smacked me away and said, "Don't fucking touch me." I just looked at him and said, "I thought you were like that with all of your friends. I'm just trying to make sure you're not touch-starved." I've seen rodeo bulls look less angry than he did. When we did play D&D, my character was conspicuously targeted by every spell and attack possible. He said he was trying this thing where the DM rolls death saves and not the players, to add suspense. Imagine my surprise when my character died after 3 rolls. On the last day, he pulled me aside. He started yelling at me about how I was getting in his way, and he accused me of trying to get with Penny. Like I was trying to take her away from him. I said that both Penny and I were in committed relationships already, and that he doesn't own her. He got louder and louder, spouting every incel nice guy talking point like a goddamn tape recorder. I'll admit, I got a little pissed at him, so I said the most hurtful thing that came to mind. Quote, "If you actually saw her as a person, you wouldn't have to lock her in your basement to get her to be with you." Yeah, he punched me. Hard. I don't remember much after that, but I apparently fell and he started kicking me. I had a giant bruise all across the side of my face, and my torso looked like a grapevine. But I had something much more precious than that. An actual crime, camera footage, witnesses. I watched this man get dragged off by people wearing Mickey Mouse name tags. Literally the best thing that's ever happened to me. Penny was absolutely pissed at him, and whatever concern she had for him turned into pity. She was luckily able to make her flight home, and moved out as soon as she got there. Hal and I had to stay, sadly. I spent the day in the hospital, and I had to make sure the police got an accurate report of what happened. The cleric and the sorcerer were more than happy to give a statement as witnesses too. We're starting a game again next week. I offered to DM a few one-shots while we get the group back on track. Penny is living with her girlfriend now, and I think they're planning to move out of state. And that, kids, is the story of how I fixed my D&D group by getting punched in the face. It's funny, for a guy so obsessed with hating chads and jocks, he did stuff I've only seen movie bullies try to pull. TLDR, DM trades housing for sex and becomes emotionally manipulative when player stops wanting it. Ends up punching me in the face. Damn, that is one hell of a story. That whole situation between Penny and Hall, while I understand they are consenting adults, sounds like it could produce some problematic power dynamics, which we end up seeing when Penny decides to get into an actual relationship and pay rent. It sounds like Hall didn't want to let go, and got to extreme levels of manipulation to try to get what he wanted. Thankfully, OP was looking out for Penny when they took their group trip, and got in Hall's way so he couldn't try anything creepy. Though, it does sound like OP had to pay for it with getting attacked. Though, it sounds like OP didn't mind that as much, since he got footage of it. I would love to hear y'all's thoughts on this one. And by the looks of it, we still have time for one more short story. So let's get right into it. My first time DMing almost made me quit. By Reddit user Zedekiah117. During quarantine, I decided I wanted to try DMing, since I had only played a few games before, back in the 3.5 days in high school. I am a bit embarrassed that I didn't see the red flags from the start. I made a post mentioning a bit about me and the kind of campaign I wanted to run. I sifted through the ocean wave of requests and found a group of 4 that I thought would be a good fit. The 4th player had a friend who really wanted to play, so he got an invite as well. Everyone made their characters, and the 2 friends decided to both play Oath of Vengeance Paladins. The next day, I got a 10-page backstory from one of the paladins, who, in hindsight, had main character syndrome, and the other, what I would learn, is referred to as a murder hobo. The first paladin would constantly request plot hooks to his backstory, and then never act on them. He had a really shitty attitude, both in and out of game. Literally, anytime I would introduce a plot hook, it would go something like this. DM, the ghost of your murdered father appears to you in the night, as you take watch by the campfire. Paladin, I don't trust this guy to be who he says he is, and I tell the ghost to fuck off. Meanwhile, his friend would pull out his dagger and threaten every single NPC, even though he had a lawful good alignment, which he said is because he would never actually do it. He was just trying to scare them. Since I was new, I sort of rolled with it, but he quickly started getting against the party's bad side, even causing conflict both in and out of game. He also never paid attention, and constantly needed to have a recap. This guy was also a rules lawyer and a metagamer, constantly correcting me, pausing the game to look up any rule, and looking up monsters in game constantly. Quote, he should only have 15 hit points left. Or, quote, watch out, this creature is immune to fire damage. I am also pretty sure he was playing video games at the time. Long story short, it was a nightmare for the first 5 sessions. Thankfully, the rest of the party reached out once a player tried to trigger PvP, and I had just kicked them from the server, feeling relieved. One of the players tallied how many times friend number 1 said, I don't care. It was 27 times. Since then, I have run several other games with the rest of the group, and are currently on our second fully fledged campaign. I've also run other games in different systems for various groups, and have an in-person game going now as well. Now that I have a pretty good handle on it, I really enjoy being a DM. The joy of running a crazy session and my players cheering and having fun is great, and I almost missed out on enjoying this hobby because of 2 bad players. This story just goes to show you that if you have a bad experience with something your first time doing it, it's mostly always a good idea to give it another go. I'm glad to hear that OP has come into his own as a DM and is having a great time with it. Do you have a story about a bad first time with a tabletop RPG? Or an experience with a creepy player that you would like to be shared on the channel? If so, feel free to post it in the comments, on the channel subreddit, or even just at me on Twitter. As always, I appreciate all of you who watch and like my videos, and may all of your rolls be natural 20s. Until next time.